welcome Africa's Lion of the Mountains, Sibusiso Vilane.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate that. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you my journey to the top of the world, which is nothing really but my attempt to reach the summit of the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. But obviously, you have got to start somewhere, and then I am going to try and explain to you as to how did I get to come from the bushveld where I come from, which is in Mpumalanga province, Nelspruit, where I was born, but I grew up in the small kingdom of Swaziland. How did I decide then to embark on this journey to the top? I must promise you beforehand, or confess beforehand, that as a kid while growing up, I was never too interested or inspired or encouraged to even hike, later on thinking of about climbing a mountain, because my life when I was growing up was such that I want to focus on my education and therefore get onto a job and work and see that as life. But sadly, while my parents separated when I was about 4 years old, I would be then taken to the small kingdom of Swaziland by my mother, who tried to see me and my sister grow up. So as a result of her efforts, I only got to school at the age of 10, and by that time I had been running around in the bushveld herding cattle, and then later tried herding goats as well, which was not great. So when I got the chance to sit in a classroom in a school to learn, I just appreciated that opportunity, and I took it and I made it work for me, because I knew then that I was probably going to change my life if I had a form of education. But straight from high school, I went on straight into a working environment. And I was lucky because after attempts of trying to get a job, I will only get a job in a nature reserve in Swaziland. And on a Saturday afternoon, after having worked in this game reserve for nearly 3 years, a person walked into the reception where I was serving, and I overheard a conversation between him and my work colleague, which went like this: "My friend, you work in such a beautiful game reserve. I did a walk today, and I found it so rough and rugged, and I didn't feel comfortable walking on my own. All I want to know, my friend, is that there any groups of hikers or people who come and walk in your wonderful place, because I would like to come and walk here." And my work colleague said, "I'm sorry, sir, people that come and walk here, if they do, they come and walk with their own groups of friends." I look at this man and I see that he needs someone to help him. But before I introduce myself to him, he says to my work colleague, "Do you perhaps know a guy or a young fellow that I can ask from the neighboring community?" And again, my work colleague correctly said, "I don't think it would be a good idea to allow someone to come and help you in the game reserve." At that stage, I stood up because my heart was pounding, saying, "Just tell him you will be that guy." And I went to him and I said, "Hello, sir, I hear you'd like to come and walk in this game reserve. I am one of the game rangers here, and if you really are serious about wanting to do another hike, I will be able to give you my time on a weekend when I'm off duty." Then obviously introduced himself to me, saying his name is John Doble. He was the then British High Commissioner serving in Swaziland and South Africa at that stage in 1996. So he says to me, "When are you going to be on your next time off on a weekend?" I gave him the date, and he said, "I will call you closer to the time to see if you are still available." And yes, I was available. So on our walk, we walk and I lead him, I take him nigh on a very beautiful trail. We sort of crisscross a river when we were crossing, and I didn't want us to every now and then take off our shoes, because we will cross this river multiple times. So I said to him, "We can actually rock hop some of the sections, because I know it's quite safe and I will be able to help you to do that." So that's what we did. But while I was helping him scrambling on these little rocks, this man was watching me very carefully. And obviously he admired the way I was helping him. And then eventually later on, we found ourselves at this beautiful waterfall, and we'd come from the bottom of it along the river. So when we got there, he had a very stunning shot of it. It looked beautiful and pretty. So as we were just looking at it and admiring it, he says to me, "My friend, is it possible for anybody to climb up to the top part of the waterfall just to have a view of it from the top? And it wasn't in the days of selfies, so dear friends, I confess, he didn't want to take a selfie. He just wanted to have a view of the waterfall. And I said to him, well, if we don't swim, because I can't swim, I can be able to help you just like we've been doing by climbing and on the side of the rock, and I'm sure we can be able to do that. So he says, okay, lead me, then I will follow you. And there we were, scrambling on the side of the waterfall, and eventually I helped him safely, and we found ourselves at the top part of the waterfall, and my friend was amazed by my ability to climb rocks without having climbed any other rocks before. But then he wasn't to keep that quiet or to himself, because before we left that area, he says, my friend, I've been watching you very carefully since we started walking together this morning. You were leading me up on the rocky sections with such ease and such agility, and climbing up here comes natural to you, and I think you would have made a good climber. So immediately I thought, that's very kind of you to say that, so I thought I would make a comment where I said to him, look, sir, I don't really understand why people even bother to go climb mountains, later on rocks for that matter. And I go on and I say to him, there are people like you that have been working over the years. I see them every now and then. They come here with big bags and they call themselves backpackers. I can see the smile. They're all cheerful and they're all happy. We send them out and they disappear for a couple of days. But there's something that always puzzles me. When they walk through that door to sign out, I look at their faces. They are not happy. They are not cheerful. I see miserable faces, people hobbling along with blisters on their legs, and it always begs the question, what were you doing out there in the first place? So I thought I was winning this argument with this man. He says to me, well, my friend, climbing is such an amazing sport because you don't just haphazardly go out there and climb. You apply your mind into it. So you think and you plan, and you need the technique and the skills to do it. Therefore, it trains your mind to focus. It is an amazing sport. But he says to me, but talking about that and having looked at you today, I believe that there are many other Africans who have exactly the same ability and talent as you are, but it makes me puzzled why Africans have not climbed the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. So I thought, well, Mount Everest is a mountain that is overseas. And I said to him, are we talking about a mountain? Because I knew our mountain in Africa is Mount Kilimanjaro. I like that, yes. Said there was nothing called Everest in Africa. So I said, it is a mountain overseas. He says, yes, it is a mountain in the small country of Nepal or Tibet. So then I said to him, you realize, say, that the reason we have not been able to climb Everest is not because we can't do it as Africans. It is because we can't afford to go to climb a mountain, because at that stage I thought, what would I say to my mother? You want to buy a ticket to go where? Overseas. To do what? To climb a mountain. No. My mother is striving every day to bring food to the table, and you want to pay to go to climb a mountain. It won't make sense. So I thought, well, Sibusiso, you've got him there. You've won this battle. He says, my friend says, I understand it is very expensive. In fact, he says to me, it is not even just about your traveling costs. You've got to also pay for a permit to be able to climb the mountain. So I said to him, how much does the permit cost then over and above your traveling costs? He said for Everest, for one to be able to sign up with an agency, $10,000. I said, yes, exactly the same. I said, exactly that. I said, $10,000? That's the money that my mother can never understand. Why would I want to pay? He says, no, it is not just the $10,000 to be in the paper. You also need resources like your gear and food and everything. So I said, well, let us just give it a rough estimate. How much are we talking about here? He says $50,000. And I said, you realize that it is exactly what I was saying to you, that it is not because we can't do it, it's because we cannot afford it. So he says to me, wait, let us say money wasn't in the picture. Let's say we're not talking resources. Let's say you had everything that you will need to climb Mount Everest, would you do it? So I thought, well, but why would you want to do it? And that was very profound because I believe that was the question that I needed to answer immediately to be able to answer him. So why would you want to do it? Because he says to me, it is a big mountain that requires a team to do it. It is a mountain where people fall off near dying. He says this to me. So I ask myself, but why would you do it? Within seconds, I had found my why. And then within the second, I said to him, yes, I would climb that mountain if I get a chance to do it. And when I said, if I get a chance to do it, I would do it, I had no clue how high Mount Everest was. I'd never read a book about it. I'd never seen a picture of it. I was blank. But there's one thing that somehow encouraged me to say, yes, if I get a chance to do it, I will do it, absolutely. It was because he had said to me, an African has not done it. And therefore I thought, well, your why you want to do this thing will be because you want to do it for Africa. And I would find that a very encouraging and a motivating reason that would then obviously make me take up the challenge. So my friend and I start talking about it as we were walking back to where we'd left the car, and he explains to me that this is the type of a mountain that I'm going to be climbing. Now he says it is 8,848 meters above sea level. So I said, what is that? He says, this is like taking 8 kilometers, and then you point it up towards the skies, and surely it will be above the clouds. I said, yeah, that is quite big. It's very big, but if I get the chance to do it, I will do it. So from 1996, we're working around how does one get involved into climbing Mount Everest. And the sad reality of it was my friend wasn't a climber himself. So he used to telephone and write to people. He doesn't use email even today. We don't email each other. We write to each other even today. So it took us about 7 years trying to find out how does one get involved in this expedition. And he left South Africa in 1999, went back into England, and then obviously this is a climbing country. It took him a very short time to find that there was a company that is putting together a team to climb Everest in 2003, which would be 50 years later. So it was a very historical year to climb Mount Everest because of the 1953 summit by Edmund Hillary. So John writes to me, says, Sibusiso, I found a company in England. They are putting together a team to climb Everest. It's not a team that is based on what you've done in the past, even though they want that. But all that they're doing is they are collecting people who have two things. We have the money, which is $50,000 I didn't have. And they're looking at people who have experience that have climbed 8,000-meter peaks here and there, and I'd never done all of that. So he says to me, I write to you to ask you because you once indicated that if you had the chance to do it, you would do it. He says, are you still interested? He says, I'm not trying to influence you to say you will do it because even if you decide to go, we'll still have to try and find out where to get the money, and I don't know how that's going to happen, but just let me know if you still are. So I wrote to him and I said to him, you realize when I said, yes, I want to do it, it wasn't because I was suddenly getting too excited about this expedition or to climb Mount Everest. It's because I want to do it for Africa. So if I get a chance to do it, I want to do it. Because I said to him, all I want to do is I just want to carry my continent to the top of the highest mountain in the world and tell the world, we Africans are also capable of achieving amazing things. Thank you. So I send this letter to him, and he receives this. He goes back to this company, says, yes, my friend wants to climb it. And they say, what is his climbing experience? He says, well, I'm afraid he hasn't climbed many big mountains like Everest, but I've been with him in the Drakensberg in South Africa, 3,000-meter range, and then he's climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and then they say, no, that is not the type of experience we will actually even look at for someone who wants to attempt a Mount Everest. If Sibusiso wants to do it, we'll see him spending 5 years building up and training and preparing for this climb. My friend, he says, no, I understand all of that, but we have got 8 months to help him to get to climb Everest. How are we going to do it? So they go back and forth, and eventually at the end, the company succumbs to John's arguments because he had faith in me. They say, well, he's okay, we can accommodate him in the team. And when they said that, I thought to myself, after what John has to go through, they were saying, you know what, we will pay his $50,000. He will only climb up to base camp, and then he will get there and say, this is not for me. He will walk away, we have nothing to lose. So, but that was the mistake they made, because I wanted to even crawl on all fours to be able to get to the summit of that mountain. That's how determined I was going to be. So, what did we secure the funding? We were never able to get corporate sponsorships, but through John's network, and he was able to introduce me to a person who says, I understand what you're trying to achieve. I've tried my efforts as well to get funding from companies I know, but nobody seems to be interested. Therefore, I am happy to sign you up for the expedition for no reflected glory. So he came up with the fee or the cost of it. And in 2003, I was able to set off to climb the mountain. I teamed up with 12 other people. We came from 7 different nationalities. I was the only South African and African in that team. Others came from America, from Canada. We had Mexicans. We had people coming from New Zealand. So we were quite a diverse team of climbers that were going to climb this mountain. And it will teach me one lesson, that it is when people believe in the end goal that they are able to work together. And that end goal could be anything, be it a vision or be it a goal that you've set out to achieve. If you share that, you are able to work together regardless of your previous experiences and your background as to where you come from. So that was to teach me that. But we knew that we cannot be the only team. We needed a very big support team, and that was made of about 20 climbing Sherpas. These are the Nepalese people that will help us to embark on this journey to be able to climb Mount Everest. But the team that we needed was a team that believed in each other, a team that was inspired, a team that was willing to collaborate, and was a team that was sharing the same goal. And on a mountain, it's easy to do that because all of us come together and we want to reach the one summit. And therefore, we have got to come together to be able to achieve that. So I won't have climbed Mount Everest with any other better team than that team in 2003 without any experience. And no one else asked me about it to say, where do you come from, or what mountains have you climbed before? It was the matter that we are here to help each other to be able to reach the top. And that was very profound, and obviously I feel very, very indebted to them as a result of that. They were very accommodating. Anyway, our team of Sherpas will divide themselves into carrying Sherpas. They fix and they go and help you. They set up your camp, and you literally carry nothing. You just walk without carrying any weight, only about your day pack, which weighs nothing. So for the first 10 days, we walk to the base of this mountain, and they are there helping you. They cook for you. They carry all your gear. Some of them carry 20, 30 kilograms or 40 kilograms. And we use their little hotels or tea houses, as we call it. And then, obviously, by the end of March in 2003, I found myself at base camp. Base camp is at 5,300 meters, much, much higher than where you are right here. In fact, I saw as we were coming over a pass, it said 340-something. And I thought, geez, this is the only highest in this place. Well, the base camp of Mount Everest is at 5,300 meters. So this means that when you arrive here, your body is starting to feel the effects of the high altitude. So for walking from here to the end of the building, it will take you a number of stops for you to recuperate and try and recover from that stress. So as a result of it, you spend the first week having arrived at base camp just here, not going anywhere near climbing. And we call that acclimatization. So it had taken us 10 days to get to this phase of it. When we got here, then we knew what was standing off in front of us. It was our ultimate vision. It was very clear right in front of us. But mountains will teach you this lesson in a much more practical and profound way, that if it is a big mountain you are climbing, the only way you can achieve that is by not focusing on the big mountain, but focusing on the smaller achievable objectives. And the mountain will teach you that phenomenon very practically. So how we do it on the mountain is we divide the mountain into 5 camps, 4 camps higher than base camp. It's Camp 1 at 6,000 meters, Camp 2 at 6,400 meters, Camp 3 at about 7,300, and then Camp 4 at 8,000 meters, which is literally known as the death zone. So once the team is adapted at base camp, the next phase is what we call the acclimatization program, where you are trying to allow your body to naturally adapt to the effects of high altitude, and that can only be achieved over a prolonged time that you spend at the base camp and having to climb a little bit higher every now and then. And we end up coining a phrase that climbing mountains is about climbing higher and then sleeping low, because it is every altitude gain that your body gets helped, but you can't stay at that altitude that you've gained. You've got to descend back down lower that you can feel that you are recovering or recuperating. So the second phase is to acclimatize, and the way we do it in such a very frustrating manner sometimes, because we call it rotations. So a rotation will mean that each climber must climb from base camp up to a certain level, which is Camp 1, stay one night at Camp 1, the next morning you descend back down to the base of the mountain where you started, and that is one rotation. Then your second rotation will mean climbing from base camp up to Camp 1, passing Camp 1, climbing another 400 meters to Camp 2, and then you stay a night there, then you descend back down, not to Camp 1 only, but all the way back down to the base. So your third rotation, which is your final rotation, you're not even anywhere near the summit. You're not thinking about the summit. You know it is there, but you are focusing on these achievable objectives, which are the 3 rotations. So your final rotation will be from base camp, back up to Camp 1, to Camp 2, each night in each one of them, and then you climb up to Camp 3 at 7,300 meters. When you get to 7,300 meters, if you are going to 8,848 meters, surely it sounds logical to sort of get to 7,300 and go all the way to 8,848 and summit and go home. No, it's not done like that on mountains. So from 7,300 meters, you withdraw back down to Camp 2, to Camp 1, and back to base camp. All the way back down to base camp. And that's because of the rest days in between and the fact that you are in a team and you accommodate each other, you want each other, and we know it's natural. People respond to certain things at different times. Even recovery from altitude or any other adventure or challenge on your body, you respond differently. I might be feeling good tomorrow to go. Other people will say, I need another 2 days. But we are in this thing together. So we communicate, we talk to each other, we tell each other, we ask each other, are you feeling okay to go up tomorrow? If someone says, no, I'm not going to go up tomorrow, I feel that I want another day to rest, we all stay and wait for that person until they are all able to be saying, I feel fully recovered, and then we can go. So as a result of that, the rotations take about a month themselves. You do about 3 weeks of 3 to 4 weeks of this up and down, up and down. So a month, you're not even anywhere near the summit. You are still preparing to go to the summit. But the challenging side about that is the 3 to 4 weeks are not plain sailing. You have got all these visible gravities or obstacles that you are contending with every day of your life. They are outlined on the slide. I will only pinpoint one of them, which is the weather pattern. The weather changes every 10 minutes. That's very different all the time. So that tends to be your challenge every day. You are climbing either up or climbing back down, but they are always there. And they ask you the same question, why are you here in the first place? So every time you start from base camp, you are dealing with this big rubble, it's these big blocks of ice the size of this building, some of them. In this area where we are climbing, it is along an area called the Kumbu Icefall, which is described as a frozen river of ice. But these ice rubble that you see is so unstable that every time that you climb on them, they can collapse and kill you at any time that you're there. So every time you find yourself here, you are living death every minute, every second of your existence there. And the other challenge, obviously, being the weather conditions, as into cold at night, because as soon as the sun plummets, if the sun goes down, temperatures will plummet to -15, to -20, sometimes to -30. And now you are contending, or you are dealing with these challenges even way before halfway up the mountain. It tends to be like in life, I believe, because you will be setting up on this project, and before you even start executing it, you have a whole host of challenges that you face, and it's exactly the same on a mountain. That's why we are able to take that and apply in whatever else we do. But it is just being in it together with people, because if you are all alone, this will just break you. But because you are with people, you are able to look up to them and say, if they are here supporting me, you will go. So we have hundreds of these ladders that you can see on the slide, and you ask who puts them up there. It is your team of shepherds that is able to risk their lives, and they go and set up the ropes. Then, talking of ropes, I think when I was there, we had about 10 kilometers of rope on the ground. That is for safety. And then hundreds of those ladders, which are only able you to cross some of the crevices that are near impossible to deal with. You cross hundreds of them every time you walk up and down, and accidents do happen. Now, with this ease of information getting up to and from, you'll be sitting at base camp and thinking that you are going to go somewhere, and then the news is such that someone fell in one of those things, either died or got injured. And you are sitting at base camp saying to yourself, we are going to back up there. It asks you exactly the same question, which I thought was very important for me to think about. Why do you want to do this? It is after that definition of the why are you doing that you are able to overcome all of this. Because if you don't really know clearly why are you there, it is easy for you to get up the next morning and say, I hear that at the Kumbu Icefall, where we were going to go tomorrow, someone fell in one of the crevices and he's died. I'm not going there, I'm going home. But if you know that this is part of those stepping stones, this is the obstacles you've got to overcome, you are able to mentally prepare yourself for this challenge, because you know that your goal is beyond these challenges. And I believe that we human beings have got this ability to outgrow the challenges. So for 4 weeks, we've been trying to crisscross up here, going up and down. And by the end of April, my team had been to 7,300 meters, and I was very delighted about it. Delighted in the fact that it was the only time I had been to 7,300 meters in my life. I'd never climbed to that altitude before. So as a result of it, I was very encouraged and very self-motivated to keep going, and obviously relying on my teammates that were with me. So we got to 7,300 meters. We were able to look back and see how pretty it was and how far and how high we had come. It was very encouraging. So as a result of it, we stayed at that camp at 7,300 meters, and with excitement. Final rotation at 7,300 meters. This night, we were hit by the highest wind speeds I've ever experienced in a little tent. I was so scared that I was going to be blown off in that little tent down into the valleys below where I was. I never had a wink while staying at that camp. So it was the only time I was very delighted when the expedition leaders called us in the morning, says, guys, make ready, because within half an hour we are leaving this place. I said, thank goodness, I'm glad we're going down, because all the other times I've always questioned, why do we have to go up and down? I really feared my life. But we had achieved the second phase of the expedition. So now we were just embarking on the final stage of it, which is to go for the summit attempt of the mountain. But we don't start from 7,300 meters. We go all the way down at base camp. We rest from there we went down to the base of the mountain and waited patiently for a 7-day weather window opportunity. So it will come as a blessing in disguise when on the 8th of May, remember having arrived towards mid-March, now we are beginning of May. On the 8th of May, we get a fairly good weather focus saying we are good to go. So my team said we want to be one of the first teams that want to embark on this journey. So we set off from Camp 1 to Camp 2. When we were to climb up to Camp 2, the weather had changed to like this. You could only see at your feet. But the challenge with seeing at your feet is that all these hundreds of those crevices that you saw earlier were now well hidden. They're well breached. So you could just stumble onto them and obviously fall down into them and then you'll be dead. So it was not ideal for us to climb in these conditions. And our team of leaders, the two leaders, Robert and David, went outside to assess the conditions and they said to us, it is not possible. From 6,400 meters, they said, we will go back to the little tents and wait, and then we'll be able to contact base camp in the morning and see if they've got their latest weather focus. So we succumbed to that, went back to Camp 2 and stayed. At about 8 a.m., they contacted base camp, and we found the most appalling weather report saying that we are not going to move because the weather was just going to linger on like that for the entire week. So they said, for us, you need to evacuate Camp 2. We drove back down to base camp, and we did that. We sat down at base camp from the 8th of May up until the 17th of May, where we're sitting in frustration because now you're waiting there in limbo. You get up in the morning, you don't know what's going to happen. And that is where your mind has to play the game here, because you look up in the morning and at the same time your mind says to you, why are we waiting here? We should be either going up to the summit or going home. And then obviously you start entertaining negative thoughts and talks. You don't want to do that. How were we able to handle that? It was being able to talk to each other, visit other teams and see what they're doing, just to try and keep our minds busy and focused. Anyway, on the 17th of May, we were given another sort of a fairly good weather focus, and my team again decided we want to be one of the first that goes. We went up to Camp 2, to Camp 3. We found it like that, and this time I was able to pass Camp 3 going towards Camp 4. And we learned, obviously, that through weather conditions, if the weather in whatever space you are, in whatever operation you are, if it changes, the only way you can still play your game is by being flexible to the weather change. Being flexible to the weather change means you accept the change, you embrace the change, and you see the change as a great opportunity. So you ask what great opportunity for you, Sibusiso, was there on the mountain. I realized that it gave us more time to go back down to the base of the mountain and rest more and have more energy than we would have waited in the storm living miserably. So it was just being able to adapt to the change, knowing that, you know what, there's nothing that you can do without embracing that change. And therefore, I believe in everything that we do. Change will always happen. Change is inevitable, as they say. But for us to be able to still try and achieve what we believe in, what we're setting out to achieve, it is a challenge for all of us to also change our attitudes towards change and say, change we want, because change is great opportunities and change needs to be embraced, and when we move on. So we did that, and we had to be flexible about it. Flexibility was meant that we go back down to the base of this mountain. So when we were given that, if you wake up in the morning to sort of do your own weather focus without having to hear someone tell you, you assess the conditions by looking up the mountain. When you see that slide, which is very clear, with no cloud, then you get excited. You have a smile on your face, because that tells you that there is no breath of wind, and that's perfect conditions to go. But if you get up in the morning and you see the one with the cloud, before you even eat your breakfast, you will say, you lose your appetite and don't go to breakfast, because you know you are not going to go anywhere. That slide means that those are high winds blowing at about 120 kilometer wind speeds. That's deadly. You don't want to be there. 17th of May, we got a good call. We set off from base camp. We got to Camp 1, we got to Camp 3, and then we eventually found ourselves at Camp 4. When we approached Camp 4, we could see the cloud was really threatening with a big blizzard or storm, but we were still very hopeful. So we got to the top camp at 8,000 meters. 8,000 meters in mountaineering terms is known as the death zone, because this is where your muscle tissues starts eating themselves up. They cannibalize themselves. You literally are dying when you get to 8,000 meters. So the idea is for you to get there and spend the shortest of time, go to the summit, come back to that camp, only endure that one night, and then you descend as quickly as you possibly can while you still live, if you're very lucky. So we were if you still live, it is the dead zone anyway, and you were there, literally. So we arrived at about midday in the dead zone, and the weather was looking okay. But now you can't get there and start climbing, so we needed to rest for a few hours, and then we only start climbing at night. We start climbing at night because this question comes up every time. Why do you start climbing at night? We climb at night because that gives you enough time to reach the summit of the mountain in the early morning hours of the day. Because in the late afternoon, you want to be already at the safety of your camp. If you are still trapped or caught up high, then that's a disaster, because high altitude weather start closing in. You get hit by storms without being protected by your camp. So that's not ideal. That's why we start climbing at night and then go up summit in the early morning hours, be able to descend back down to the safety of your camp. So we waited until about 7 p.m. I was waiting patiently in the tent when I saw it flap a little bit, and I realized that this was disaster, because every little breath of wind can turn to a blizzard within a short time. And lo and behold, within half an hour, the winds were blowing at 120 kilometers per hour. There was a little tent sitting on my face like this for the whole night. But sensibly, our leaders said the conditions outside are such that we cannot mount our attempt for the summit. We will wait and see what the storm does. If it subsides within a couple of hours, then we are good to go, and it never did. We stayed until the early morning hours of the 20th of May, which would have been my summit day, and we woke up in the morning, and we looked around. The wind was still viciously blowing so high, and because my team had been a night now, and we were going into another night, we were very worried. But the leader said we can wait and see what happens in the late afternoon. And in the late afternoon, it gave us a glimmer of hope, because the wind died down, and then we were excited. At about 7 p.m., we set off with a few other teams that had arrived the same night. We were 2 nights. We set off, we climbed to 8,100 meters. We climbed up to 8.2. We climbed up to 8.3. And we were doing so well up until about past midnight. When we were still climbing, I could hear this very loud roar of wind. It sounded like a big private jet taking off. And this was the jet streams approaching, and within 10 minutes of it having hit us, everything was just disaster. Powder snow was being blown into our faces. We could not see where we're going with little torches. And then in front of me, I saw the 2 leaders stop together, whisper something, and we gathered together, and they said, "Not possible." When they said that, we were only 248 meters before the summit. But because we were contending with nature and weather, there's nothing that we could have done within our human ability or capability to push through the storms and summit. 200 meters meant that if we forced ourselves up, we would probably have perished. And people say, but 200 meters. I say, well, this is 200 meters of altitude, and other people don't even make it, even given perfect weather conditions when they are 200 meters before the summit. So extensively they said, we are calling this off. Disappointed, from 8.6, we withdrew back down to 8,000 meter camp. Because my team and I had been 2 nights in the dead zone, it wasn't ideal for us to wait and sit the storm at that night. So that forced us back down to Camp 2. From 8.6 past 7.3 at Camp 3 down to Camp 2 at 6.4. There was a talk that we might as well go all the way back down to base camp, but we refused. Other teams that experienced the same fate, we just said it is not possible. This mountain will never be summited this year. So what they were doing is they were reacting to the situation, to the weather change, other than responding to it. For me, that is the key thing that we need to do when it comes to change. We can't react by saying, it ain't going to work, no one will reach the summit. But when we respond to the event, you say, how can we possibly achieve what we set out to achieve in spite of what is happening? So we sat down at Camp 2 and we assessed the situation, and we realized that it was a very clever and right call to turn back 200 meters before the summit. By that time, we're closing into 6 weeks on the mountain. So I was heartbroken because I never thought we would get a chance to do it. But before the meeting finished, the two leaders of the expedition says, actually, we have assessed our material conditions, resources. We still have got enough food. We have enough oxygen. We can go for another third attempt if you guys want. What they were calling us were like, it is no longer about material resources. It is about, do you still have the inner will? Do you still have the drive to go and mount another third attempt? And all of us said, we are not going to give up like that. We are going to wait and sit here until the weather changes, and then we give it a go. It took 3 days for that weather to give us a chance to go back up again. And when that was cold, we persevere with hope that this time it is going to happen. We climbed from 6,2, we climbed up to 8,000 meters. We arrived at exactly the same time at about midday. We rested for the afternoon. At about 7 o'clock, we were called to make ready because we were going to go for it. It was at about 9 o'clock when we set off in the night, in the evening, towards the summit. Back to what we'd done about a week ago, we're back to 8.1, up to 8.2. We were doing quite well that night, even though there was a stage where the winds were blowing at 180 kilometers per hour, but the most challenging side was temperatures were estimated to be between minus 36 and minus 50. There was a stage where I could not feel my hands. My feet had died completely, and I knew then that I don't have hands anymore because I couldn't feel anything. That's how severe the cold was. In fact, the conditions were so miserable that every time the two men in the front leading the way, they stopped, and I thought, oh my goodness, they are calling it off again. But the only time I was getting happy and excited when I saw them turn around and say, let's keep going. So that keep going took us again back to where we'd been before. And the higher you go, the views, obviously, well, you can describe them anyhow. For me, when I looked around and I saw how beautiful it was, it just encouraged me to want to stand on the summit of this mountain. And then I climbed and I found myself at this part where I had been turned back about a few days ago. It is at 8.6. This is where I needed to go back and try and remind myself why I was there. Why had I suffered throughout the duration of the expedition to be there? And I realized that that message that you believed about Africans, you are still carrying it, but you need to deliver it on the summit. And that is what prepared me for this section of the climb. The very last part or stretch to the summit. It is knife edge, as you say it. This is now on our third final attempt on the mountain. You climb from 8.6 and then stay on the ridge. This is where there are no rooms for errors. This is where all your intentions must count. I found myself climbing alone throughout that section. Why? Because my two teammates had sort of climbed strongly ahead of me and my climbing Sherpa was far behind me. That's why I was still able to think and relate to myself to where I was. But before I looked up, I saw them, my teammates, coming down like in haste. They were rushing down and I stopped dead, like where I was. I said, I'm not wasting any ounce of energy going up if it has been called off. I will wait until they get to me here. It was only when they got to where I was that I saw them smile at me and say, Sibusiso, we only have this little ridge to clear. You will be on the summit. They said the reason we could not wait for you is because it is still very, very atrocious out there with the wind and the snowstorms. It is very dangerous, but be safe, look after yourself. I said, thank you very much. Be careful climbing down. You know that is a two-way journey. So I went up and I took the very last stretch of it, and then it was on the morning of the 26th of May that I was on top of the world. I stood on the summit of that mountain and I was only up there for less than 10 minutes. But that was the best 10 minutes of my life, because it was when I was standing up there that I was able to look within, to look and say, how possible could I come from the bushveld in Africa and be able to stand on the highest point on earth while I was seeing the world? I realized that it did not just happen because I was superhuman. It had happened because I persevered together with my team. We fought through the storms. We were able to adapt to the changes that were happening around us. We were able to be flexible when the change hit us. We were able to embrace the change and still hoping and believing that we were able to achieve what we had set out to achieve. And then that's what I picked up from that mountain. And I believe in whatever the changes we experience in our own sphere of operation today, it is just our challenge and a call to always embrace change and take it on and still strive to achieve what we're setting out to achieve. And that is my message today. Go out there. There will always be the storms. There will always be the blizzards. The road will always be tough. The crevices will always be there. But you and I have this amazing ability to grow, to be bigger than the changes and the challenges that we face in our life. Thank you very much indeed for listening so very patiently. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Thank
Wow. Sibusiso, an incredible life story, incredible journey.
Thank you.
And as you can imagine, there's quite a few people who got questions for you. And the first one, which is liked by... how do you shower up there? Or do you just call it a day for a few months?